Another Monday is here. I want to share some random stories with you guys, and this is the first one I want to talk a little bit about is a 97 or 98, I think it's a 98 F-150 that this guy had inherited from his dad, and we had done some work on it. And we had fixed a PO401 code one time on that thing, and by cleaning the gummy stuff out of the EGR passages, which is fairly common on those. You know, you kind of get to where whenever you get a code on one that you fixed a lot of doing that same code, you say, well, I know what's wrong with this thing. And so a lot of the time what you got, you know, you can understand how these things works real easy. It's got this DPFE sensor up here. The metal one defaults to about 6 volts when it, 6/10 of a volt on the signal wire whenever there's no, you know, pressure changes. As there's an orifice in between these two pipes, and as the EGR begins to flow, that orifice there, the pressure goes down, and on that one the pressure goes up because it's got a little, it's like a little washer in there, sort of a little place that chokes down the pressure so that the pressure gets high here and it's low there. And it uses that signal will go up as more EGR flows, and it will tell it to, it controls it using that DPFE or that 9J459 solenoid. So, you know, we'd seen so many of different ones for different reasons, EGR not flowing and all that kind of stuff. These tubes, like these rubber silicone hoses, like to come off sometimes whenever you got a plastic intake, and they'll destroy the intake if it pops off and there's exhaust just spraying out on that plastic intake. I've seen that too. Like a big old hole under there you can't even see. On this particular one though, we got a PO401 code, fixed one, and he came back and he says, I got another check engine light on. And this is the only guy I've ever seen that when his check engine light quit working, he wanted it fixed, you know. Crazy on a truck that old. But we had to do a little wiring work on it on a previous time to fix the check engine light so it would work. One way or another, what we found on this one, and I couldn't find the picture of the failure, but I found the picture of what I did to fix it. We didn't have a whole lot of time on this one here to fix it. We were right at the end of the wire at the end of the semester. And I said, Brian, I'm going to put this thing, I'm going to build something to hold that pipe up, because that bolt, that stud had rusted completely in two, and it just let that fall, and the place where the EGR gets its exhaust gas is right above this, and so there was no exhaust pressure there to push the, to feed up through that pipe to the EGR valve, and it was still in a PO401 code. Also had a big exhaust leak, which you wanted looked at too. But at the time I didn't think about the exhaust leak causing the PO401. You can get smacked around on something like that because you're not thinking clearly or whatever. Anyway, what I did was I got a piece of, the old plate that comes on your air conditioner compressors whenever you buy a new one, and I got an Allen wrench, and I got a nut, and I put on that, welded on that other side of that, and I screwed a bolt up through here with this Allen wrench over the top. That looks kind of crappy, it really does, but at the same time it worked. And the last I told him, I said, we'll drill that bolt out next semester. We don't have time to fool with that right now. And if you try to get your manifold off, then you're liable to break bolts off, going into the head. Then you do have issues. I want one that's as old as that one there was. But anyway, we got that taken care of this way. And that guy, he drove out. He's still driving that truck with that same cobbled together fix that I did on it. It ain't going anywhere, I don't guess. But I kind of had the idea that Allen wrench might pop off of there and let it drop again, and if it did, it wouldn't really matter that much. But last time I talked to him, I think I did this fix in 2017. Last time I talked to him, it never gave trouble again. All right, the next one I'm going to tell you about, I've mentioned this before, but I don't know if you caught it. On a lot of your Toyotas and some of your Hondas and stuff, you'll see a fuel pulsation damper. The pulsation damper is like a little diaphragm that keeps the sound of the fuel injection from bouncing the lines and causing noise issues. And pulsation dampers are fairly common on vehicles. Another way that they reduce the amount of the propensity of that fuel injector sound to carry is they make the fuel rail square instead of tubular. They make a square tube out of it instead of a round one, and that helps apparently from what I've been told. I'm not an engineer, but this is what they tell you when you're going to some of the schools, But if you pop that little plastic cap off, and some of them don't even have a plastic cap, like on a Lexus, a 94 Lexus that we had, it had one of these on it. And that one right there, whenever that screw right there, whenever you have fuel pressure, that screw will move like that. See how that one's raised up? And here's the thing, if you're standing there, let's say you got a nose start, and you want to see if you got fuel pressure before you check anything, because these don't even have a regular Schrader for fuel pressure anyway. You got to get an adapter and hook it, tee it in. But if you can look at this, if you turn on the key and that screw moves, it's got enough fuel pressure to where that vehicle ought to start, if fuel is what it's pumping. It can have water in there. But if you don't see that screw move, you know the fuel pressure is not there for whatever reason. Now, all that's going to do is give you a visual indication of whether you have fuel pressure or not. I went to the Toyota place one time, and I told the mechanics over there about it, and not a single one of those Toyota mechanics even knew about that. I don't know why they didn't know about it, but they didn't. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even remember where I learned it, or if I just noticed it on that Lexus, because on that Lexus 4-liter, it was back there on the back, and it was real easy to see, and I noticed it would move. But I just, you have information that you can't remember where you got it, but it's always right. I mean, it's just one of the things. Okay, this one right here was one that I was at a school one time in Tallahassee, Ford school, and it was a transmission school. And one of the guys that was one of the mechanics that was at school down there brought this piston, and he said if you just looked at that piston, you wouldn't see that there's nothing wrong with it. Actually, he had turned it around. It's the way it's supposed to look on the other side. And he said it's got a crack right there. And he says that thing beat him up something terrible, because they had to pull that transmission apart 4 or 5 or 6 times before they found that crack and figured out that crack in that piston was what was losing their fluid pressure. And I took that picture right there at the school. I thought that was very interesting. This right here, clamp failures are always annoying to me. Whenever a clamp is supposed to be doing its job. This clamp right here was not quite big enough to go around the hose that it was tightened around, and because only a couple of these little only a couple of these little slots were engaged with that screw, that worm screw, that clamp failed. Now, looking at that clamp, basically what my rule of thumb for the students was, if you don't see some of that clamp coming out the other side, it may be too short. Another problem I used to have with students was new students wouldn't tighten clamps tight enough. They wouldn't realize just how tight a clamp needed to be in order to keep the coolant from leaking. But that one right there failed. Now, some of these stupid things right here failed too. That one right there failed. That was on a Cadillac. One of them Cadillac crossovers, I can't remember what, CT something, CTS, whatever. Anyway, I never can remember them CT numbers from during Cadillacs. But that's what it looked like on the other side. See how that thing popped? It broke right there. And I have seen more than a few of those spring steel clamps like that break. And it can be an engine killer. Imagine yourself on a long desert drive out there, and somebody felt like the old clamp bite, and they put it back on there. If that thing breaks and it loses your and plastic radiators, if you've got a high mileage vehicle with a plastic radiator, you best be thinking about replacing it, because those things can split without warning and destroy an engine. Pumping any kind of coolant through plastic has always seemed like a bad idea to me. It's amazing to me that there's not more failures of these plastic parts carrying hot coolant than there actually are. This right here was this crack right here in this Nissan Altima. It kind of threw us for a little bit, because the customer came in there and said it was making a noise under the hood, and so yeah, well, of course it's making a noise under the hood. But whenever we went in there, it sounded like the noise was coming. It's got that cover on the top of the engine, the plastic cover, just to make everything look pretty. They don't want you looking at the part, so they cover everything up with plastic. Now, some of these people do that. Like on some of these higher end vehicles, you open the hood, you see nothing but an ocean of just plastic stuff in the way, so you can't see the motor or nothing else. Anyway, this thing right here, that noise was, the heat shield is removed from this, obviously. That noise was going through the heat shield, it was going under that plastic cover, and you would have sworn it was coming out from under the valve cover over there in front of where the passenger sits in the engine compartment on that side. The craziest thing I ever saw. But we tracked it down. I mean, whenever we get our listening pipe, you know, with our stethoscope on, you start sniffing around in there, and that's what we found in this one here. I basically sent that one over to the welding department. We had a really good welding department at the college, and they welded that sucker up, and we put it back on there and didn't have any more trouble with it. All right, this was a 2007 Buick Lucerne that sometimes would give trouble. It would start and it would die, and it would start and cut up and die, and then finally they'd start it, and sometimes they'd quit beside the road and all this kind of stuff. And I worried with that darn thing for a while. Finally, I put this little hiccup recorder on it. And this hiccup recorder, if I'd have thought about it, I'd have got a picture of the little recorder. You can buy one of these. It only records 4 channels: battery, spark, pulse width, and auxiliary. But this is live data now. This is not scan data. It's live data where you're hooking up. So the auxiliary right here was down here. This is basically, I like to hook that to the relay that's powering up the engine controller, so I can see if the engine controller is powering up. You might remember I fixed a Chrysler Crossfire using this same tool, and it was pretty handy to find out that that little relay module was bad, a little Mercedes relay module. There's this one right here is a normal start. Battery voltage goes down. You're used to seeing that when you're spinning, and then when it fires up, you know, the voltage goes back up, and then your engine's running right here. Injector pulse width is nothing smooth here. It jumped up when it was starting, and then it's leveled out. And then the auxiliary, you know, it followed this pretty much, and so we're good on that. This is what happened when it didn't start. When it didn't start, we spun it, it started and died. Spun it, it started, and then finally it stayed alive, but it was really kind of ragged. You see all that crazy fuel injector pulse and everything, and it was just wacky. Now, like I say, this right here is going to look similar to that. That's battery. This right here kicks up to the battery voltage when you turn on the key. So that's why those right there are looking, you know, different. Auxiliary, I had it in there. And so this is what I found. Right down there where the cam sensor wire, somebody had worked on it. I mean, I don't know. We bought the car, the college bought the car used, and it was one of the president of the college drove for a while. But it had breached that little wire right there in that cam sensor pigtail. And this was after we fixed it. That's where it's supposed to be fixed. We put loom on it and moved it over behind there. But before we fixed it, it was out here, and this spinning balancer managed to make its way back in there and breach that a little bit. Now, I wasn't touching all the time, but when it did, it killed it going down the road, or it made it start hard. That one there was great fun. We worked on that for a while, and it also had fuel pressure issues too. We had to put fuel pumps in it and everything. But anyway, that was one of the crazy ones there. This Explorer was an '08 model that belonged to one of the instructors I worked with, and she had us change the oil on that thing regularly because she drove a long way from where she lived to the college where we worked. And I decided one day while we had oil in there, it had 236,000 miles on it, or 238. I may have put that number wrong. I think it's 238,000. When you see the spot of paint on the spark plug on the Ford, that typically means it's the original plug, and you can also tell by the part number on some of them. This one here, I pulled it out. Those were the original plugs. They had never been changed. That's what it looked like after 238,000 miles. And that Explorer never gave a minute's trouble. A lot of people feel like Explorers break a lot. If you keep the oil changed, and you always keep them running at operating temperature, you're okay. All right, that's what the deal was on that one. And I've got a white one like that, but it doesn't have all the fancy chrome on it and everything. Mine's an 06. But I hadn't had any real trouble with mine, but it's only got 75,000 miles on it. Anyway, now this right here, how many of you guys have seen one of these? How many of you guys have worked at a shop where they had one of these and you never knew what it was for? That's one. Now, I used to see these things and I say, what the heck is that darn thing? I mean, I'd see them at a Ford place, and all of us mechanics would say, I don't know what that thing is. I mean, it's been around here for a while. It lays there. Some people say, oh, is it a soldering iron, or what's it for? Or, you know, well, here's what it is. It's a J21 552 Kentmore steering rack piston arbor. I had one of those at the college. They had one at the Ford place. I don't know if I've ever used one, but it's a solid, hard, I mean heavy metal, and it's got a little point on the end. And I did find one time a little illustration of where, you know, how it worked and you know what you're supposed to do with it. But you put it in that little apparently whenever you're putting the seals in the steering rack some kind of way. You hold it and it keeps the steering rack centered going through there whenever you're, putting it. I don't know. I've never used the thing, but I just thought I'd show a picture of it because every time I turn around I see one. Some of you guys have probably used one. I imagine I'll probably get some comments on this. But this Nissan was a pickup. It was a Nissan pickup. I don't remember what year it was. It was a little small Nissan pickup that was like a '08 model or something like that. And he said whenever I start out, the transmission's pulling good, but whenever I go a little ways, the transmission quits pulling and it tries to slip. And I said, well, that sounds like a filter problem to me. And we pulled this filter off, and you see how clogged up with crud it was. And basically, what does that remind you of? The filters on the older Ford C4 and C6 transmissions were steel like that. The Chrysler one had a really nice, thick paper filter on it back to the 727 and 904 torque flats and all. Those things had a really thick paper filter that would stop just about everything. This is a doggone screen, and you could actually clean that screen and put it back in there if you want to, or you can buy a new whatever. Well, we replaced that screen and took care of his transmission problem by just doing the transmission service because the filter was clogged up and it was starving for oil. Couldn't pump the oil through the filter to give pressure to the transmission. This right here was a Pontiac charging system issue. The people down at the diesel department at the bottom of the hill had worked on. Sometimes they'd work on cars down there, and they really didn't have the resources well, they basically had all data down there, but they didn't use it very much. They'd usually just try to wing it and fly by the seat of their pants. And they had, I don't remember what kind of work they had done on this, but they may have had the starter off for some reason and put it back on. Anyway, it was brought to us. It says that now that they've through working on it, the engine runs and all, but the alternator won't put out, and we don't know why. And this is what we found. See if you see what's wrong with this picture. They hooked the wire that's supposed to go to the alternator to that post, not to the one where it goes up here, but they hooked it to the one that only gets juice whenever you've got the starter solenoid energized. So it should have been hooked to that one, and it was hooked to this one. And so this one here is the one that goes right to the starter. Oddly enough, with the alternator putting out, see, because there was no power there, unless you're spinning it over, then you didn't have any starter operation that was trying to happen because of the alternator. But anyway, that was a crazy thing. We just moved that up here, and instead got that fusible link wire and took it off there and put it up here. That was like a 06 Pontiac or something like that. Now this is a bad call that I made on a Titan. I fell in a trap. Have you ever sat in a classroom under one of those instructors that will tell you that I can figure out anything, and if you can't figure out anything as fast as I can, then you're an idiot and you shouldn't be working on cars and all that? Well, I'm going to tell you, sometimes I make a bad call, logically thinking it through and tracking this down. This Nissan Titan came in with a horrible noise, and it was just terrible. It was a terrible engine noise sound. And when I went under there and get to listening around with my scope, with my stethoscope, and screwing the end off of it, used for listening pipe and all that, I determined that there was a flywheel that was busted on this thing. And so I said, okay, so let's pull the flywheel. Well, sure enough, the flywheel was busted, just like I thought. And so we went to the trouble to put the flywheel back on. And those are one of the things that impressed me about that darn thing was the bell housing bolts are really big and they're really tight. It was really hard. Anyway, we got all that. We put a flywheel back on it, got it all put back together, fired it up, and it wasn't noisy anymore like that, but the longer it ran, the noisier it got. And what we found was, in that little piece of an oil pan under there where the sump is, it had all this sludge in it, and that little screen was all clogged up. And so we cleaned all that up, but the damage had already been done, and it basically had a cracked flywheel, and it also had an engine knock that was being masked by the cracked flywheel. And so whenever we gave them prices on fixing the engine knock, they were all put out and ticked off and all that, and thought we didn't know what we were doing. And all that. Of course, sometimes you carry that stigma, whenever you're in college and students are doing the work. But you know, we did some pretty good work over there. Anyway, the point is, when she took that thing to another shop to get it fixed, she decided she was going to try to take us to the cleaners, I guess. And she says, this guy at the shop that I took it to says that you never replaced the flywheel. And I still had that flywheel. I hung on to it because I put it in the classroom with all the other busted flywheels we had. And I told her, I says, I tell you what, I says, if that guy is saying that we never replaced that flywheel, I want you to bring me the flywheel that he took off of that truck. Because I've still got the busted flywheel. I can show you the busted flywheel. And you got to come up here and show me that flywheel. And before I'll even listen to anything else you have to say, you bring me that flywheel, I want to see it. Because we put a brand spanking new flywheel on that thing. And she was basically trying to act like we didn't do any of the work. She was trying to get the money back for the flywheel and all that. And I says, I'm not going to play that game. You got to bring me the flywheel. She never showed. We were done talking when I told her I wanted to see that flywheel that the guy had pulled off because he said we never changed it. That was stupid. Anyway, every now and then somebody will do you that way. But that was a bad call on my part. I guess I probably should have checked to see if there was sludge in there. But we didn't work on enough Titans to where I was familiar with that. Maybe this is a failure that happens all the time. Maybe it was just something, you know, for some other reason. But it was a mess, you know, having two noises and one of them masking the other one. It was kind of cloaked. This 2012 Fusion is one I never figured out. You know, some of those highfalutin mechanics. This thing right here would freeze up. The evaporator would freeze up and it would quit cooling. You know, it would quit blowing air. And it would get hot in there. And what I was seeing was register temperature that was 20 degrees. And I would see evaporator temperature on the IDS was showing 48.2. And it would just keep running the compressor until it froze the doggone thing up. Now, you know, I replaced that little pressure, you know, transducer under the hood. Well, the first thing we did was we replaced that little thermistor in there, which is always going bad on those Fusions, you know, where if you've done enough of them, you can just, you know, take the stuff loose, pull the dash back a little bit, reach down there and swap that thing out right quick and put it back together. And we worried with this darn thing. And the problem was she would never leave it with us long enough to where we could really sink our teeth in it and keep working on it. And I measured voltages, and I basically went to the point of even putting the little controller, electronic controller part on it that reads this stuff. But every time I turned around, I took this thing up, that was always reading 48. I mean, you know, it would move a little bit, but it never got cold enough to turn off the compressor. And this was always getting colder and colder and colder. I tell you something else I did. I actually took one of those little thermistors, a good one, and right there in the, it didn't cost anything really to do this, and I temporarily wired the two wires that were going to the thermistor in the evaporator housing. I temporarily ran those wires to a thermistor that was mounted in the stream of air that was given this temperature here. I said, let's just let it cut it off when that temperature gets cold coming out those registers. And it basically seemed to me like that should have read, you know, a temperature like this and turned the AC compressor off whenever the thing got cold like that. But even that didn't fix it. I fooled with that thing off and on for probably, I don't know, it was probably all one summer. And but she never could leave it with us long enough where we could just keep it and work on it. She had to take it every day and all that. And you know, most shops won't put up with that, but she was a colleague of mine, worked over at the college. And anyway, when it was all over with, that lady, when she first came to me, first time she ever showed up over there, she says, my ex-husband, I think, has a GPS on somewhere on my car. Can you get it? Can you find it and get it off of there? Because he keeps telling me he knows everywhere I'm going on my car. And I looked under there, and it was just a plastic box. It had a magnet on it. It was stuck in there. So I pulled that off and gave it to her. She went and gave it back to him, told him he could keep his GPS from then on. But anyway, but that's something I just never really managed to get closure on that. It really annoys the crud out of me. I mean, it would frost up that suction line like with frost a quarter of an inch thick sometimes, and it would just get colder and colder and colder and colder and colder until it, you know, did that. And you know, I had actually evacuated and recharged it a couple of times to see how much refrigerant was in it. It did all kinds of work on it. I mean, I don't remember everything, but and what was really something is I looked on a forum post looking around just to see what I could see on the internet about this. And this one guy said his Fusion was freezing up like this. And he left it for 2 weeks at his Ford dealer in Georgia, and they couldn't figure it out. And so he had to go to Florida and make a trip. And while he was in Florida for about a month doing some kind of work down there, he left it at a Ford dealer down there in Florida. They kept his Fusion, same year model as this one, given the same problem. They kept his Fusion down there for like 2 weeks at the Ford dealership down there and gave up on it. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. Now, you know, I'd like to say I was smarter than them, figured it out and all that, but I didn't figure it out. I did a lot of experimentation to see if I could make it act right, but I never did fix that one. Somebody knows what that is and what it would take to fix that. I wish you'd let me know. Anyway, this right here was a no start. We did an engine swap because you've seen these catalytic converters come apart and they get in there through the EGR system and whatnot, and they bust up the motor and all that kind of stuff, just ruined it. It was just knocking up a storm. So we threw an engine in there, and after the engine was put in there, the boy did a good job putting the motor in there, it wouldn't start like that. And so this is what happened there. These little ground wires right here that are supposed to go to the block right there, he had left those loose, and we put those back on there. We fired that one up, and it was a done deal. But that was an interesting little thing. Now, these aftermarket Chevy blower controller, I was really disappointed in this. This was supposed to fit where that one went. I mean, they went out of their way to, but they changed the configuration of it. I don't know why they couldn't make it like that. See, this actually mounted on there, put the blower, but there was absolutely no way that I could make this one work. I mean, it seems like you ought to be able to. I don't remember exactly the reason why, but we tried to put that one on. It just absolutely would not fit. We had to send that one back and get one from the Chevrolet place that was configured just like this one, so it would go in there. But see how they messed all that up? It's almost like somebody drew it the wrong way or something. I don't know what the deal is on that. This bad Dayco belt design is no longer available. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these belts like this, but a belt like that, one of them shiny Dayco belts like they made like that, you know, the Gates belts have a nice fuzziness to them, and so do the Daycos now. They got away from this design here. First time I ever saw this, one of my previous students coming there with his Chevrolet pickup truck, and he had a horrible whining noise, and he had replaced the alternator. He had put tensioner on it. He had put pulleys, all that kind, and it was still whining the same way. I took the fan off and listened to it, and that noise was coming from right there where the belt was going across one of the pulleys. And whenever I took that belt off of there and I put a regular belt on there that wasn't shiny and fluted like this, there was no noise. I saw that on some other vehicles too. One of my previous students had been working at a used car dealership in another place, and he said he had replaced a power steering pump because it was making a lot of racket and it was still whining and he couldn't figure out what it was. And I asked him, I says, tell me what the belt looks like. Is it fluted and shiny? You know, like a shiny belt with fluted cuts across it like that. And he said, yeah, that's exactly what's on there. I said, if you'll put another belt on there, that noise will go away. And he did. Well, I wrote about this in a magazine, and Dayco called the magazine publisher, technical editor, and was railing on them. But I did not say Dayco. I did not mention Dayco belts in my article, but I had this same picture in here, and they recognized it as their belt design. And they were railing on us, saying, why did he talk ugly about our belts like that? And I said, because I've seen them give too many problems. I don't know if it does it on every vehicle you put one like that on, but that belt design causes people to replace a lot of parts that don't need to be replaced, because you never expect a belt to make a whining noise like that one makes. This one here, them old transmissions, you know, that had the spinning governors on them back there. And it wasn't just Chevrolet that did that either. You know, Ford's had their governor on the drive shaft. Chevrolet had this plastic gear. That plastic gear busted off of this one. It wouldn't shift. We pulled it out and it was broke. But on the other hand, there was an Escort I worked on one time when I was at the Lincoln Mercury dealer in 1983, and or whenever it was, I was over there, 83, 84, whenever it was. And this Escort came in, brand spanking new Escort. And Escorts had a governor like that. You pop that little cover off, you just pull the governor out, drop another one in there, and it was being driven off of a plastic gear that was on the final drive, on the carrier, differential carrier, and it came in not shifted. And I said, well, I know what that is. It's bound to be a governor. There wasn't no electronic transmissions in them days, you know, or not on escorts. So I reached down there, pulled that governor out, looked at it, didn't see anything wrong with it. Everything's flopping around, so I'm just going to put a governor in and see what that does. I put a governor in it. It drove out of there, shifted just fine. Came back a week later the same way. And then whenever I pulled the pan off and looked up in there, that big old drive gear that's supposed to spin the governor was bouncing around loose on the differential housing, and it had worn that little driven gear that goes right here. It had worn that out to the point where it had a mild hourglass shape. If you drag your fingers across it, you could feel it. And so I pulled the final drive out of that thing. They said you would have to pull the transaxle out to do it, but I managed to get that thing out of there. You know, I pulled that bearing housing out of there, and I worked it out of there and put that plastic gear on it. I actually put some brass shim stock in there and bent little tabs on it so it would be tighter, and it wouldn't do that anymore because it probably wouldn't have anyway. But it was a bad idea to put a plastic gear on there. It's going to turn loose like that and mess things up. Put it all back up in there. I was through with it in an hour and a half. And the service manager was a pedantic kind of a guy. That means he pays a lot of attention to detail. And he came in there and he says, "This is supposed to pay 6 hours, and you were done with it in an hour and a half." You know, it was a warranty job. And he was questioning how fast I got through with it. And I said, "I don't know why you feel like you need to burn me for getting it done, you know, beating book time by 4.5 hours. That's ridiculous." At that same dealership, there was these, and I think I may have talked about this before, they had these, the Tempo was a brand new vehicle then. They just had come out. As a matter of fact, they had carburetors on them when they first came out. And the cylinder head gasket was leaking oil. You know, that was basically a cast iron engine with a camshaft in the block. Really a fine engine. I mean, solid cast iron head, cast iron block. I mean, it was like half of a V8 of those Tempos. Anyway, it would run, oil was running down the front of the block, and this was a brand new platform. They did not want that, you know, brand new, you know, first of its kind car out there leaking oil down the front of the block. And so what they did was they put out this program to have to replace the head gasket, and these things were coming in there left and right. One of the reasons I went to work at the Lincoln place was they were paying a really good flat rate for somebody that would work on the front wheel drive cars, which the other old mechanics didn't want to do that, and work on transmissions and work on the electronics, you know, and that's what I hired on over there for. And so I went over there, and they had this was an old shop that was in a big Quonset kind of a building, and they had a long rail across my end of the shop, all the way over all the service bays, and it had a hoist on it, you know, a chain hoist. And you could roll that thing so it would be over any and every car on that, and pretty cool because you could raise it up, move the engine over, set it on the floor, and all that stuff. But I figured out after the first one of those I did that all you had to do was take that brace loose from the back, take the, you know, and take the exhaust loose, and then pull your cylinder head bolts out, and hook the chain fall to the cylinder head, raise it up about 2 or 3 inches. You ain't even unhooked all the vacuum lines and all that junk, you know. And so I would slide that thing. Believe it or not, that engine didn't even have dowels for the cylinder head. Just beat all I'd ever seen. But anyway, I pulled that gasket out of there, and I would feel around under there and make sure there was no bumps or anything. You could feel it with your hand. I put my hand all the way under there. You could feel all around. This is a new motor now. It's nice and clean. That gasket didn't have any glue on it. The new gasket had this blue glue on it. It was tacky. And I'd slide it under there and make sure it was lined up good with all the holes. And I just lowered that cylinder head back down. Zing, zing, zing. That paid 3.5 hours, and I could do it in 45 minutes. I made a lot of money on those. But anyway, that was pretty cool. One time I bought a Tempo that was only about 2 years old. It was 85 miles. This was in 1987. And some guy from overseas had bought that car and drove it 38,000 miles without changing the oil until the motor locked up. And then he defaulted on the loan and went back to Saudi Arabia or wherever it was he's from. And it was sitting out there on the lot. It was a good-looking car. It was only a couple of years old, worth about $4,000 or $5,000 running, you know. And so I asked the bank. I says, you know, I found out it was a repo, and I said, what would y'all take for that car? And they said, well, he owes $1,200 on it whenever he defaulted on the loan. I said, well, I'll give you $800 for it. And they said, okay, we'll take $800 for it. You know, we lost $400, but that's better than losing it $1,200. So I bought the thing, and I bought an engine and a transaxle all in one unit from the salvage yard. Now this was in 1987 when that 85 model Tempo wasn't 2 years old. And I put the motor in it and charged up the air conditioner and all that kind of thing, put a set of tires on it. When I got through with it, the $600 is all I paid for the motor and the transmission together, because those things weren't giving a lot of trouble then, that they didn't move very fast, and salvage yards sell them cheap, you know, as far as the powertrain. And I got that thing buckled up, put together, and put a brand new set of tires on it, and I had like $1,900 in it, and I sold it for $3,500, I think, which was still lower than the book value on the car. And I actually sold it to my aunt, and my uncle, or my aunt's husband, my uncle, he drove that doggone thing. It had 38,000 miles on it. I sold it to him, and he put 100,000 miles on that car and really had no trouble with it at all before they finally got rid of it. But anyway, they were happy, and I was happy, and I made some money speculating on the deal, doing the work on it, and all that. This right here, I was doing a little test on a, this was a Nissan van, a Quest. You can see it kind of in the background there. I didn't set this slide up quite the way I should have. But anyway, what I did was I hooked the fan, you know, hooked these test light in series with that fan. You can do that just on like pins 2 and 4, you know, or 1 and 3, what I mean. But I basically have this drawn wrong. But you can find the right pins by going by this, and you can hook your test light in, like I'm always talking about, and turn that fan through. And if that light goes off during any of the circle of that fan, then it's a bad fan. That's just the way it is. That's the end of the slideshow today. I just basically told y'all some quick stories on a lot of different vehicles, and hope you like that. And I really appreciate the likes, and appreciate the comments, and I appreciate you watching the videos, because I really enjoy telling my stories. And I'll talk to you next time.